Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, we are back eventually from College Station, Texas, and Missouri beats Texas A&M 34-27. One of Missouri's, I would say, maybe their best effort of the year, going into a hostile environment in front of more than 100,000 fans and playing their best offensive game in quite some time, gaining nearly 600 yards. Sort of just impressive all the way around. It was a little surprising it was even as close as it was. So let's first talk about the offense in the beginning. What do you think kind of contributed to that massive offensive outbreak?
Well, I think, sitting here last week, I had said, and I think you agreed, that we couldn't see Missouri winning a game in the 30s. Mm-hmm. Well, they won a game in the 30s, and they probably should have had more even. So, yeah, it was surprising. I mean, Texas A&M is a bad defense. You can't get around that. But they've played bad defenses before. South Carolina was bad, Vanderbilt was bad, Kentucky was fairly bad, and they didn't light up the scoreboard, or I guess not the scoreboard, but light up the stat sheet like they did against Texas A&M. And, you could say that A&M was missing Myles Garrett, their, freshman phenom pass rusher. They were missing one of their interior linemen as well. But, I think Missouri would have done much the same thing if those two guys were in too. They just maybe would have given up a sack or two as well. It just seemed like what we saw Saturday was something we hadn't seen all year from the line, which was just road grading on every single play. This was something that we saw frequently last year, was guys getting to the second level and just kind of flattening linebackers and safeties, and the whole defensive line is kind of falling over because the offensive line was doing so well. And that's what we saw against Texas A&M. These holes that the running backs were going through were huge. I'm rewatching the Russell Hansbrough's first touchdown run. He had about 6 feet of space, and then just Evan Bames, in front of him, just kind of looking for somebody to block because there was nobody there. So I think it was somewhat because Texas A&M is a bad defense, but it was mostly because the line just blocked exceptionally, both in the run game and the pass game. Matty Mock didn't get sacked for the first time since the South Dakota State game this year. They just were, the line was just great in all phases, I think.
Yeah, it almost seemed like they sort of robbed Texas A&M of their will to tackle, too, by late in that third quarter. There were some very suspicious tackle attempts going on in some of those running plays. Like, I know in the one sweep that Russell Hansbrough took to the left, there were people getting out of his way at odd angles.
But yeah, there was the one cornerback who kind of jumped up in a way and tried to almost swim move him or something. It was odd.
So they do have a bad defense. But I will say this: the other factor that was that they did have their three best receivers on the field, and as much as Matty Mock struggled early in SEC play, some of that obviously was due to having receivers who weren't getting open. This time, they had the three best receivers on the field. They all appeared to be really healthy, and those guys made some great catches on some key third down plays to keep drives alive, which I thought was a big factor in the game. The most notable maybe is the one where Matty reversed his field a few times and threw it over the middle, perhaps not super wisely, but Darius White made a great one-handed catch. But even beyond that, all three of those guys made clutch catches that kept drives alive. I kind of sometimes was questioning why they weren't running the ball even more. They did run it 49 times, but I think they got to the point in the second half where they could have just run it every play, and they probably would have won a little less nervously than they did. Yeah. But in the end, they did win. They've now won 9 straight road games, 7 straight SEC road games, which is hard to really fathom. This is something you might think about for a team like Alabama, something like this, but Missouri, I think that would be a stat that is very surprising to people nationally. What do you think maybe some of the contributing factors that are making Missouri such a good road team?
Well, we're not supposed to talk about it with Gary Finkel because he doesn't want to think about it, and we're going to jinx it if we do. So he won't provide any insight. And I don't think the players...
I'd say the odds of Gary Finkel watching this webcast are slender, so go ahead.
Slender? Really? I would say it's a little less than slender, micro slender. Anyway, but yeah, so they've won 9 straight road games. 7 have been in the SEC, like you said, and the second longest streak in the conference right now is 3 with Georgia and Alabama. Missouri is the only team in the SEC that has a road win streak dating back to last season. That's how good they've been on the road, over these past 2 years. And I don't really know what what the spark is. It might be the kind of us against the world mentality. They go into a road environment, and usually if it's in the SEC, they're going to be underdogs, like maybe not against Toledo or Indiana last year, even though I think they actually might have been underdogs against Indiana last year, slight ones. But so, I think they kind of thrive on that, it's us against the world, and nobody believes we can do this, and that sort of thing, and they don't usually get that feeling when they're at home. So I think that's good for them. I think they don't get, cowed by the big stage. It's not like they go into Kyle Field and see 104,000 fans and just start shaking in their boots. I mean, they know how to handle it. And I guess that starts with coaching, and it's also a credit to the players as well that they can, realize that, the Gene Hackman scene from Hoosiers, it's still, appropriating it for football. It's still 100 yards each way, and however wide fields are and things like that.
Well, I think a big factor, too, is I think the real danger zone in a road game is right at the beginning. Before a game, the crowd is at its intensity peak usually, and there's fantastic hype video showing up on the board of the opposing team and coach in the huddle, and it's a little bit intimidating. Missouri's in a great. It's easy. I think it's easy to lose or put yourself in a huge hole in a road game with some problems early, and then you spend the whole game. Once you settle in, you're still fighting out of that hole. Mm-hmm. Well, Missouri's road games this year in the SEC, I believe they scored a touchdown first against South Carolina and took a 7-0 lead. They scored a touchdown on the opening kickoff against Florida, and they went down against Texas A&M and immediately scored a field goal to take a lead. So they've taken a lead on their first possession of all three of their SEC road games. So I think once you sort of eliminate the initial wave of emotion, then it just becomes two teams playing football, and there are just occasionally issues with noise interrupting your offense. I think we saw a little bit of that with Missouri with the false starts, although they also false start at home. Yeah. But I think they're just, for whatever reason, a little bit inflappable, and the trade-off is they're nothing special at home. I think, that's just the way it is. They're just sort of a steady team, but it's been that way for 2 years, so I think it goes beyond coincidence to, it's just sort of their MO, and it's probably has something to do with coaching, something to do with the personality of the players. But I think whatever it is they're doing, continue on if you're Missouri, because you're going this week to Tennessee, which leads us into segue.
Well, I think maybe they should get, sorry to ruin that beautiful segue, but I mean, maybe if they got a hype video of Georgia and Indiana beating them at home and show it on the big screen, that would kind of spur them. That's the kind of outside the box thinking that I bring to this.
That's why you are a beat writer and not a marketing guru. So lastly, they are going to Tennessee. This is a team that's really hot. They're coming up, they just smashed Kentucky at home, sort of put Missouri's 10-point victory over Kentucky to shame. I think it was 50-14
16,
or
something like that, yeah.
So I believe they've won 3 games in a row, and they're on the verge of a bowl bid. Just your thoughts on how Missouri might match up against them.
Well, at the beginning of the year, I thought Missouri matched up very well against them because Tennessee had no starters returning on the offensive or defensive lines. And so I thought, well, with Missouri's defensive line, they should be able to get to the quarterback whenever they want. And with, even if Missouri's offensive line is playing poorly, it can handle a whole line of, first and second year starters and guys like that. But Tennessee has improved exponentially since then. I mean, their quarterback, Joshua Dobbs, who Missouri got to see last year when he was, just kind of a true freshman starter, he's played really well these last 3 games. I mean, he got thrown into emergency duty against Alabama in that loss, and he actually played pretty well. Had 2 touchdowns against an interception, and then he's just kind of gone off these last 2 games because, I mean, I think kind of like Kyle Allen did against Auburn, the week before the Missouri game, he's kind of realized that the strength of the Tennessee team is the playmakers around him. They've got a deep, young, talented wide receiving core, and he's been able to get it to them. And also Jalen Hurd, their running back, another young guy who's really come on lately. And the offensive line has actually protected well these last 3 weeks. They've only given up 3 sacks. And then on defense, I mean, they're a little more porous than Missouri, but they're also a little more opportunistic. They create more turnovers, and they get just about as much, pass rush push off the edges as Missouri does. They've got Kurt Magid back after sitting out last year, and then they got Derek Barnett, who's a freshman who's just been going crazy this year. If not for Myles Garrett, he's the freshman standout on defense in the league. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with A.J. Johnson this week because, you know, he's reportedly one of the 2 Tennessee players that are being investigated for a sexual assault allegation on Sunday morning, and he's a huge piece of that defense. He's a 4-year starter, second leading tackler in the league, and just kind of the rock in the middle of that defense. So that could be big, you know, for this game. But I think, you know, Tennessee matches up a lot better with Missouri right now than they did, you know, right after they lost to Florida 10-9.
Mm-hmm. And Tennessee also potentially could be without its starting center, Matt Crowder, who's got a knee and ankle issues from an injury he suffered Saturday. So if they lose their starting center, that could be bad news for him and good news for Harold Brantley and Lucas Vincent and Missouri's interior linemen. So you would think a bit of an advantage for Missouri when their defensive line are rushing Josh Dobbs, but as you said, it was a brand new line at the beginning of the year, but by week 11, that's mitigated a little bit. In Missouri, I think the one good thing about facing a pretty good passing attack, they are getting Arian Fenton back this week from his suspension, and then they obviously have Braylon Webb back. So I thought they held up okay against Texas A&M, even with that shorthanded secondary. Really, the guy who got picked on was not Gibson. It was Kenyon Dennis anyway. Right. So I thought they did all right, and really defensively if there weren't for the special teams errors and sort of the bad spots they were put in, that could have been a much lower scoring effort by Texas A&M. So Missouri needs to win at Tennessee and Arkansas now, which has been established because Georgia won its game against Auburn. So if Missouri wins the next 2, they go to the SEC championship game for the 2nd year in a row, and if not, they will not. So it's all set in stone, so Missouri knows what's in front of it, and it's just a matter of seeing whether it happens. So tune in next week when we will discuss what happens in Knoxville.